At 6:30 on March 1, 1943, Major Ed Larner stood on the rain-soaked coral runway at Port Moresby, watching his B-25 Mitchell bomber crews prepare for a mission that higher command had already called impossible. 31 years old, 72. Combat missions, 0 ships sunk. The Japanese had dispatched 8 troop transports and 8 destroyers from Rabaul, carrying nearly 7,000 soldiers to reinforce their garrison at Lae. American intelligence had intercepted the convoy's departure. Every transport that reached Lae meant another division. The Allies would have to dig out of the jungle with blood. Larner's problem was simple. Traditional bombing from 10,000 feet gave ships too much time to maneuver. Japanese captains watched American bombers climb to altitude, calculated the bomb trajectory, and turned their vessels away from the splash zones. 5th Air Force B-7s had been trying to hit Japanese convoys for 8 months. Hit rate 3%. Most bombs exploded harmlessly in empty ocean while the ship steamed on. The mathematics were brutal. A 000 lb bomb dropped from altitude took 37 seconds to hit water. In those 37 seconds, a destroyer traveling at 30 knots covered 380 yards, more than 3 football fields. The bombardier aimed at where the ship was. The bomb hit where the ship used to be. Larner had watched it happen mission after mission. Bombers would come back with perfect bombing photographs showing tight patterns around the ships. Around them, never on them. Crews reported direct hits that turned out to be near misses. The Japanese kept sailing. American bomber losses kept climbing. His squadron had lost 4 aircraft in the past month trying to hit convoys. 40 men. The Japanese shot down high-altitude bombers with methodical precision. Their gunners had time to track the approach, calculate the lead, and bracket the formation with flak. By the time bombs fell, half the squadron was burning. General George Kenny, commanding 5th Air Force, had proposed something that sounded insane to every pilot who heard it. Skip the bomb across the water like a flat stone. Fly in at 50 feet, release the bomb 300 yards out with 5-second delay fuse. Let momentum carry it into the ship's hull. A bomb would skip once, maybe twice, then detonate on contact or just under the waterline. The theorists said it would work. The pilots said it was suicide. Flying a twin-engine bomber at 50 feet above ocean swells straight at a ship bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Violated every survival instinct LNER had developed. Japanese destroyers carried 127mm main guns, 25mm machine cannons, and dozens of lighter weapons. All of them could track a bomber at that altitude. One solid hit to the engine, and the B-25 would cartwheel into the sea before the crew could blink. Higher command had banned the tactic twice. Too dangerous, too experimental and proven. Larner's request to practice skip bombing had been denied. In December and again in January. The official response called it reckless disregard for equipment and personnel. Air crews needed to focus on proven high-altitude tactics. But high-altitude tactics weren't sinking ships. If you want to see how Larner's skip bombing experiment turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Pacific War. Subscribe if you haven't already. Larner walked to the operations tent and spread reconnaissance photographs across the planning table. The Japanese convoy had been spotted at dawn, steaming southeast through the Bismarck Sea. 8 fat transports in 2 columns, destroyers screening the flanks. Every ship packed with soldiers, artillery, ammunition. If those transports reached Lae, the war in New Guinea would grind on for another year. He had an idea that would either vindicate Kenny's faith in low-altitude attacks or get 60 American air crews killed before lunch. The convoy would pass within striking range at 0900. 3 hours to prepare, 3 hours to teach his pilots to fly like they'd never flown before. Larner called his squadron leaders to the tent and laid out the plan they'd been forbidden to practice. The B-25 Mitchell, wasn't designed for what Larner was asking. The bomber had been built to hit targets from medium altitude with a level bombing approach. Its twin Wright Cyclone engines could push it to 300 miles per hour in level flight. But that speed meant nothing if Japanese gunners had 30 seconds to track the approach. Kenny's modification changed everything. 5th Air Force mechanics had ripped out the bombardier position in the nose and installed 850 caliber machine guns pointing forward. 4 in the nose, 4 in blisters on the fuselage sides. The B-25 had become a flying gun platform that could put 200 rounds per second into a target. The theory was simple. Suppress the ship's anti-aircraft guns with machine gun fire during the approach. Give the gunners a reason to duck. Make them choose between returning fire and surviving. Larner had watched mechanics bolt the guns onto his aircraft 3 weeks earlier. The modification added 1,200 pounds. It shifted the center of gravity forward. It turned his bomber into something between an attack aircraft and a maritime strike fighter, something that had never existed before. The practice runs had been conducted in secret. Kenny had found a wreck called the Pruth, a 4,700-ton steamer that had run aground on Nater Reef near Port Moresby in 1924. The rusting hulk sat half-submerged, a perfect target. Larner's crews flew practice runs at dawn and dusk when the light was bad and observers were few. They learned to skim the wave tops at 270 miles per hour. They learned to time the bomb release. They learned what happened when you got it wrong. Lieutenant Jake Fawcett had gotten it wrong on February 16th. He'd come in too high, 70 feet instead of 50. The bomb had skipped twice, cleared the proof entirely, and detonated 300 yards beyond the wreck. Fawcett's bombardier, Sergeant Mike Russo, had recalculated. Lower, faster, closer release point. The next run, Fawcett came in at 45 feet. The bomb skipped once and slammed into the proof's hull just below the waterline. Right where a ship's magazine would be, right where one bomb could detonate 1,000 tons of ammunition and blow a destroyer in half. But the proof wasn't shooting back. Larner spread the reconnaissance photos across the briefing table and pointed to the lead transport 800 feet long, displacing 10,000 tons, capable of carrying 1,500 troops, the convoy's flagship. Every officer in the tent knew what was at stake. Japanese reinforcements had turned Buna into a 6-month nightmare that had cost 5,000 Allied casualties. Lay would be worse if those transports unloaded. The mathematics of skip bombing required precision most bomber crews had never attempted. Approach. Altitude 50 feet above the water. Approach speed 270 miles per hour. Release point 300 yards from target. Bomb trajectory angle 8 degrees. Delay fuse 5 seconds. Miss any one variable and the bomb would either skip over the ship, detonate short, or hit the water at the wrong angle and sink without detonating. Larner assigned each pilot a specific target. Transport 1 through Transport 8. Destroyers as secondary targets if the transports were already burning. No bomber would attack the same ship twice. Maximum efficiency, maximum destruction. One pass, one bomb, one chance. Crews filed out to their aircraft at 0700. 54 men in 9 B-25s. Behind them, 13 bow fighters from the Royal Australian Air Force would strafe the convoy first, suppressing anti-aircraft fire. Above them, 16 B-7 flying fortresses would bomb from altitude, forcing the Japanese ships to maneuver and breaking up their formations. P-38 Lightning fighters would keep Japanese Zeros busy at high altitude, but the killing blow would come from Larner's 9 bombers at 50 feet. He climbed into his aircraft at 0715. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Tom Benz, was already running through the pre-flight checklist. The bombardier, Staff Sergeant Carl Walls, was checking the bomb release mechanism for the 4th time. Nobody spoke. The entire crew had flown. Together for 9 months. They knew what a 50-foot approach meant. They knew the Larner started the port engine, then the starboard. The right cyclones caught and settled into their familiar roar. Around him, 8 other B-25s were winding up. The formation would take off in flights of 3. Larner's flight first. Stay low. Over the water the entire way. Japanese radar couldn't track aircraft below 100. Foot surprise was the only advantage they had. At 0745, Larner released the brakes and began his takeoff roll. By 9:30, he would know if Kenny's theory worked or if he just led his entire squadron into a slaughter. The flight to the Bismarck Sea took 90 minutes. Larner kept his formation at 30 feet above the ocean, low enough that spray from the wave tops occasionally spattered his windscreen. The B-25s flew in a loose V formation. Each aircraft separated by 200 yards, close enough to maintain visual contact, far enough that one burst of flak couldn't take down 2 bombers. Radio silence. The Japanese monitored every frequency. One transmission and the convoy would know American bombers were inbound. Surprise was worth more than coordination. Larner checked his watch. 30. The convoy should be 60 miles northeast, steaming at 12 knots toward the VTZ Strait. Right on schedule according to the morning reconnaissance report. The ocean below was empty. No whitecaps, no Japanese patrol boats, just endless blue water stretching to the horizon in every direction. Flying this low, Larner couldn't see more than 5 m. The convoy could be anywhere. His navigation had to be perfect. 5 degrees off course and they'd missed the target entirely. Come up on the convoy from the wrong angle and the destroyers would have time to bring their main guns to bear. At 0852, Larner spotted smoke on the horizon. Black diesel exhaust from 16 ships steaming in formation. He keyed his throat microphone once. Clicked the signal to tighten formation. His wingman acknowledged with single clicks. Radio discipline holding. The convoy took shape as they closed. 2 columns of transports, 4 ships per column. The destroyers formed a protective screen 2 miles ahead and on both flanks. Larner counted gun positions on the nearest destroyer. 6 main turrets, dozens of smaller weapons. Every gun would be tracking his approach once they broke the horizon. At 0857 the bow fighters went in. Larner watched from 3 miles out as 13 Australian aircraft dove on the convoy from the northeast. Their 20mm cannons rad the destroyer decks. Tracers arced across the water. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns swung toward the new threat. Exactly as planned. Bow fighters weren't there to sink ships. They were there to make the gunners look the wrong direction. 30 seconds later, the B-7S arrived at 10,000 feet. Larner saw the bomb bay doors open. Bombs tumbled toward the convoy. The Japanese ships began evasive maneuvers, turning hard to port and starboard. Columns broke apart. Basing increased. The destroyers accelerated to flank speed, white water foaming at their sterns. Confusion. Perfect. Larner pulled back on the throttles and descended to 40 feet. His airspeed dropped to 260 miles per hour. Walls, his bombardier was calling out distances. 4,000 yards, 3,800, 3,600. Each ship in the convoy was now clearly visible. Larner picked his target, the second transport in the port column, 700 feet long, sitting low in the water, fully loaded. His bomb would hit amidships, right where the troop compartments were, packed with soldiers. The destroyer on the left flank spotted them. Larner saw muzzle flashes. The first shells arced toward his formation. Too high. The Japanese gunners were used to tracking bombers at altitude. They hadn't adjusted for a 50-foot approach yet. At 2,000 yards, Larner opened fire. 8 caliber machine guns hammered. Tracers walked across the transports. Superstructure. Glass shattered. Metal sparked. Men on deck dropped or dove for cover. The suppression was working. The anti-aircraft crews couldn't shoot back, while half-in bullets were tearing through their positions at 800 rounds per minute. 1,200 yards. Larner's wingmen were spreading out, each bomber lining up on its assigned target. The formation was fragmenting by design. 9 bombers attacking 9 ships simultaneously. No time for the defenders to shift fire. No time to coordinate a response. 800 yards. The destroyer's main guns fired. Again. This time, the shells bracketed Larner's flight. Left-right. Close enough to rock the aircraft with concussion. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage. The co-pilot called out damage. Port engine oil pressure dropping. Still in the green. 600 yards. The transport filled Larner's windscreen. He could see individual soldiers on deck scrambling for cover. Could see the bridge windows. Could see the ship's gun crews swinging their weapons toward him. Every instinct screamed to pull up, to climb, to get away from the wall of steel rushing toward him at a combined closing speed of 300 miles per hour. 400 yards, Waltz's voice cut through the engine roar. Bomb armed, ready for release. 300 yards. Larner pressed the bomb release. He felt the aircraft lurch upward as 1,000 pounds dropped free. The bomb tumbled forward, carried by momentum. It hit the water nose first, skipped once like a flat stone, and arrowed toward the transport's hull. Larner pulled hard on the control yoke and climbed behind him. The 5-second fuse was counting down. The bomb detonated at the water line. Larner didn't see the explosion. He was climbing hard, his vision filled with sky, but he felt it. The shock wave hit his aircraft like a physical blow, lifting the tail and throwing the B-25 sideways. Benz fought the controls. The altimeter spun through 100 feet, 200, 300. Larner risked a glance back. The transport was splitting open. A column of fire and black smoke erupted from amidships. The hull buckled. Metal shrieked. Secondary explosions rippled through the superstructure as ammunition stores cooked. The ship listed to port, already taking water through the massive hole torn in its side. Soldiers were jumping overboard. Dozens of them, tiny figures, abandoning a dying ship. One bomb 15 seconds from release to catastrophic damage. The skip bombing worked. To Larner's right, Lieutenant Jake Fawcett's bomber was pulling up from its own attack run. Another transport was burning, flames climbing its forward mast. To the left, Captain Bill Hayes had just released on a destroyer. The bomb skipped twice and hit below the aft turret. The destroyer's stern lifted out of the water from the internal explosion. When it crashed back down, the entire rear third of the ship was missing. The destroyer began settling by the stern, sinking fast. 4 targets hit in the first 90 seconds. The Japanese convoy was in chaos, but the defenders were adapting. A destroyer on the far flank had turned to face the bombers. Its main guns fired in rapid succession. The shells walked across the water toward Lieutenant Tom Mitchell's B-25. The first shell missed by 50 yards. The second by 20. The third hit Mitchell's aircraft, disintegrated. The bomb under the fuselage detonated on impact. The explosion vaporized the bomber instantly. No parachutes, no survivors. 5 men gone between one heartbeat and the next. Larner watched the debris scatter across the water. No time to process it. No time to mourn. The attack was still happening. The remaining B-25s pressed their attacks. Lieutenant Carl Johnson lined up on the lead transport, the convoy flagship. His approach was textbook. 50 feet, 270 miles per hour. Machine guns blazing. The Japanese crew was firing back with everything they had. 20mm cannons, heavy machine guns, even rifles. The air between Johnson's bomber and the transport was solid with tracers. Johnson's bomb release was perfect. The weapon skipped once and punched through the transport's hull just forward of the bridge. The delay. Fuse gave it time to penetrate deep into the ship before detonating. The explosion tore through 3 decks. Fire erupted from the cargo holds. Larner knew what was in those holds. Ammunition, artillery shells, fuel drums. The transport became an inferno. Men were burning on deck, jumping into the sea, trailing smoke. Lieutenant Paul Warren's bomber took hits during its approach. A Japanese gunner on one of the destroyers had finally adjusted for the low altitude. 20mm shells ripped through Warren's port wing. Fuel streamed from the punctured tank. Warren held his course. 300 yards. 200. At 150 yards he released. The bomb skipped and struck the transport below the waterline. Warren banked hard right, trailing fire. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Dave Miller, was already activating the fire suppression system. The flames died. The bomber was still flying barely. 6 transports burning or sinking. Destroyers damaged, 1 B-25 lost. The attack had lasted 4 minutes. The second wave was coming in. 9 more B-25s from the 90th Bomb Squadron, led by Major Ralph Chell. They'd watched Larner's attack from 5 miles out. They knew the tactic worked. They knew the cost. Chell's formation spread out, each bomber selecting a target from the ships still afloat. The Japanese were ready this. Every gun in the convoy was tracking low. The destroyers had formed a defensive line, their main batteries, firing in coordinated volleys. The ocean erupted with shell splashes. The barrage was intense, deadly, calculated. The Japanese had learned from the first attack they would make the Americans pay for the second. Chell's bomber came in from the east, directly into the sun. The Japanese gunners were half blind, firing at shadows. His bomb hit a transport that was already listing. The explosion accelerated the sinking. The ship rolled onto its side and went under. In less than 2 minutes, 1,200 soldiers went down with it. Lieutenant Harold were on the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. The remaining 2 destroyers limped into rabble at midnight, barely afloat. The cost in lives was catastrophic. 7,000 Japanese soldiers had embarked at reconnaissance flights over the next 2 days counted approximately 900 survivors reaching the New Britain coast. By lifeboat or swimming. American PT boats intercepted most of the lifeboats. Some survivors were rescued. Others were killed in the water. The distinction between combat and massacre blurred in. Those 3 days. Command ordered no quarter. The Japanese had machine-gunned American air crew and parachutes. The Americans returned the favor to soldiers and lifeboats. Larner learned about it 3 days later. He didn't ask for details. Didn't want to know which PT boat crews had fired on lifeboats, which bomber crews had strafed survivors swimming for shore. The war had rules until it didn't. The rules had stopped applying somewhere between Mitchell's bomber disintegrating and the last Japanese transport going under. Nobody talked about it. Nobody wrote it. In after-action reports. It happened anyway. The final count came through on March 7th. Japanese losses, 8 transports. Sunk for destroyers sunk. Approximately 3,000 troops drowned. Another 1,500 killed by air attack. 1,200 reached Lely overland through the jungle. They arrived without weapons, without supplies, without organization. They were combat ineffective. The reinforcement operation had failed completely. American losses: 4 B-25s, 1 B-7, 2 P-38s, 13 air crew killed, 6 wounded. Against an entire Japanese convoy, the exchange rate was absurdly one-sided. Skip bombing had worked, but it had worked because Larner's crews had been willing to fly straight at destroyers at 50 feet, while anti-aircraft fire turned the air into metal. Courage didn't cover it. Insanity was closer. Kenny called it the most decisive air-sea battle of the Pacific War. Admiral Yamamoto called it a disaster. The Japanese Navy immediately cancelled all future large convoy operations within range of Allied land-based air power. The supply line to New Guinea was cut. The garrisons at Lae, Salamaua, and Madong would have to survive on what they had. They wouldn't survive long. But the Battle of the Bismarck Sea changed more than Japanese strategy. Changed how every air force in the world thought about attacking ships. The Americans refined skip bombing. The British adopted it. The Soviets copied it. By 1944, low-altitude bombing had become standard doctrine for maritime strike aircraft worldwide. Larner flew 16 more missions before rotating home in May. He never spoke publicly about the battle, never gave interviews, never wrote a memoir. He'd done what was necessary. That was enough. The question nobody could answer was simple. Would the same tactic work against a prepared enemy? The Japanese tested that question 3 months later. On June 3, 1943, American reconnaissance spotted another convoy forming at Rabaul. 6 transports, 8 destroyers. This time the Japanese ships sailed at night. This time they had 60 Zero fighters providing continuous air cover. This time every destroyer carried additional 20mm anti-aircraft guns specifically positioned to defend against low-altitude attacks. They'd learned from the Bismarck Sea. They'd adapted. The 5th Air Force attacked at 12 B-25s using skip bombing. The results were different. 2 transports, 1 destroyer damaged, 3 B-25s shot down. The exchange rate had shifted. The Japanese anti-aircraft defense had improved dramatically. Gunners who'd survived the Bismarck Sea had trained their replacements. They knew to track low. They knew to fire early. They knew to concentrate on the bombers during the final approach when the aircraft were committed and couldn't maneuver. The Americans adapted in return. By July, 5th Air Force mechanics had installed additional armor around the cockpit and engines. They'd increased the forward-firing armament to 1250 caliber machine guns. Some B-25s carried 14 guns. The theory remained the same. Suppressed defensive fire with overwhelming firepower during the approach. Give the enemy gunners no choice except take cover or die. Modification worked. On November 2, 1943, 38 B-25s attacked Rabaul Harbor in the largest skip bombing raid of the war. The harbor contained 18 warships, 30 received direct hits, 1 heavy cruiser sunk, 1 destroyer sunk, 2 auxiliary vessels destroyed, 16 merchant ships damaged or sinking. The raid lasted 18 minutes. American losses, 2 B-25s. The exchange rate had swung back in America's favor, but Rabaul proved something else. Skip bombing worked best against ships in confined waters, ships that couldn't maneuver freely, ships anchored in harbor or trapped in narrow straits. Against a convoy in open ocean, with room to maneuver and fighter cover overhead, the tactic was dangerous. Against ships at anchor, it was devastating. The British adopted skip bombing in late 1943. Royal Air Force bow fighters equipped with the technique attacked German convoys off Norway. The results mirrored the Pacific experience. High casualties, high success rate. The Germans responded by adding more anti-aircraft guns to their merchant vessels and requiring convoys to sail only under heavy fighter escort. The cost of moving supplies by sea increased dramatically. The effectiveness decreased proportionally. The Soviets used skip bombing against German ships in the Black Sea and Baltic. Their technique was cruder. Lower approach altitude, heavier bombs, less suppressive fire. The results were mixed. Some ships sunk. Many bombers lost. The Soviets had courage. They lacked the training and equipment refinement the Americans had developed through trial and error in the Pacific. By 1944, skip bombing had evolved beyond its original form. American tactics now included coordinated attacks. High-altitude bombers would attack first, forcing ships to maneuver. Fighters would strafe to suppress anti-aircraft fire. Then the skip bombers would come in low while the defenses were distracted and disorganized. The multi-layered approach reduced losses while maintaining effectiveness. The statistics told the story. Between March 1943 and August 1945, American aircraft using skip bombing sank or severely damaged 212 Japanese vessels. The cost was 47 bombers lost. Kill ratio of 4.5 ships per bomber. For comparison, high-altitude bombing achieved a kill ratio of 0.3 ships per bomber. Skip bombing was 15 times more effective. But the human cost was harder to quantify. Skip bombing required crews to fly directly at ships bristling with weapons, maintaining a steady course while tracers filled the air around them. The psychological stress was immense. Pilots who flew skip bombing missions had shorter combat tours, higher rates of combat fatigue, more frequent medical groundings for stress-related conditions. The tactic worked. It also broke the men who flew it. Larner never flew skip bombing again after May 1943. He trained new crews, watched them take off on missions using the tactic he'd helped prove. Watch some of them not come back. By war's end, he trained 62 pilots in skip bombing. 10 were killed in action. 23 were wounded. The mathematics were brutal. A 29% fatality rate, a 66% casualty rate, including wounded, better than high-altitude bombing, worse than almost any other combat aviation role. Question: